Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For over 3 years, a Saudi Arabia-led coalition has been bombing Yemen to counter Iranian-backed Houthi militia. The United States military has been providing intelligence, mid-air refueling, and munitions to the Saudis. In other words, we've been helping a lot. Our refueling assistance to the Saudi-led coalition is governed by something called the Acquisition and Cross-Servicing Agreement, or ACSA, I think. The United States has such an agreement with both Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. The Secretary of Defense is authorized to enter into these agreements with any non-NATO country, and it must notify Congress 30 days before it signs such an agreement. Secretary Mattis, can you give me a ballpark number for how many acquisition and cross-servicing agreements that the United States has entered into with other countries?
I'll have to take it for the record, and I'll get back. I think I can get back to you very quickly on that, Senator Warren. This was, as you know, a decision by the previous administration that we inherited, reviewed, and endorsed.
So what I'm trying to get at, though, is how many of these agreements? You don't even have a ballpark for what the number is?
I do not, Senator.
Okay. You know, after an ACSA is signed, the Defense Department is required to report to Congress. Or let me ask, is the Defense Department required to report to Congress on a regular basis about the type of defense assistance that's provided, or to report on any changes in the ACSA?
I'm going to have to get back to you, Senator. I know we have many times testified about this, as did people sitting in these chairs in the last administration to from President Obama's administration. You did characterize it correctly, what this one is about, right. However.
And I think you'll find that there is no regular report required. And last month, I joined a letter with Ranking Member Reed and Senator Blumenthal to the Defense Department asking for details about the acquisition and cross-servicing agreements that we have with Saudi Arabia and the UAE as they continue their bombing campaign in Yemen. Now, the DoD responded with copies of the congressional notifications for these agreements. One was dated February 1988, and the other July 1992. Those are pretty old notifications, given that we signed defense agreements with Saudi Arabia in 2016 and the UAE in 2006. Now, I'm concerned that these agreements have existed not just with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but with many other countries and with very little oversight from Congress during the administration of both parties. And I think that needs to change. There's another question I want to ask about Secretary Mattis, and that is the National Defense Strategy, which says that, quote, long-term strategic competitions with China and Russia are the principal priorities for the Department of Defense. The strategy stresses the need to modernize existing equipment, to invest in advanced capabilities, and to enhance the readiness of joint forces for a high-end fight. Many analysts have said that a conflict on the Korean Peninsula could bog us down for years, degrading our equipment and potentially resulting in thousands of casualties to our allies and to our own troops. So, my question, Secretary Mattis, is what would be the impact of a long-term conflict on the Korean Peninsula on our ability to prepare for a high-end conflict like those described in the defense strategy?
Well, as you've seen, Senator, where the full court press has been for the last year on a diplomatic initiative that is now bearing fruit. It's taken a long time. And there's a lot. I think it can be fruitful. We're all optimistic or hopeful, but we're just going to see how it works. Every effort's being made that any resort to war is the last resort as we reduce.
I appreciate that, Secretary Mattis. But my question is, if we get bogged down in a long-term ground conflict in Korea, right, what I'm asking about is what would be the impact on our ability to prepare for a high-end conflict like those that are described in the defense strategy.
You know, war is such an unpredictable phenomenon, Senator. I wouldn't subscribe to that we would get bogged down. In other words, it might go a lot faster. Neither you nor I can tell if it's going to take 2 years or 2 months.
So I'm going to try a third time. If there is a long-term conflict on the Korean Peninsula, what impact would that have on our ability to prepare for a high-end conflict like the kind described in the defense strategy?
It would be distracting, Senator.
More than distracting?
Well, if you look at what's happened over the irregular fights over the last 15 years, you get a sense of what happens when you're distracted over that time from focusing on the primary threat. But we are not going to do that. The Senate is or the Congress has reorganized the department, and we now have an undersecretary who focuses on nothing but research and engineering for the future. And so he will continue what he's doing. The department will continue those efforts. Obviously, this will be a distraction of enormous proportions.
You know, I will point out that last week I asked the nominee for Pacific Command, Admiral Philip Davidson, the same question, and he put it differently. He said any long-term conflict has significant financial costs and costs around the globe and people costs within the armed services. So I'm concerned about what would happen if we were in a position with both. But let me just say,
so am I, Senator.
Good. I am very glad to hear about your commitment to a diplomatic solution with North Korea and that we not get bogged down into a long-term conflict there. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
We've been committed the entire administration's time, ma'am.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.